Chancellor Jeremy Hunt is set to announce at today's Conservative Party conference an increase in the living wage to £11 an hour from next April.
He's also, apparently, going to say that he intends to toughen sanctions on people who are on benefits but are failing to look for work. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt is in Manchester, and we can talk to him now. Very good morning to you. Is it true?
Morning, Susanna. Morning, Ed.
Morning. I'll let Ed on to you. I'll unleash Ed on to you in just a moment.
Ed is probably missing these party conferences.
Well, you can have a discussion about that, but I'll unleash Ed in just a moment. I just first want to talk about this benefits sanction promise. Are you going to say that to benefit claimants that if they don't look for work, turn up for job interviews, that you're going to cut their universal credit, their benefits?
Well, it's carrot and stick, Susanna. What we're saying is, yes, we do think that taxpayers are paying for the benefits bill and that people should seriously engage and look for work. We've got 300,000 people who are not ill, they're not disabled, and they've been out of work for more than a year. And we've got 1 million jobs, companies desperately trying to recruit people. So, yes, we do want them to engage properly with the process.
Okay. And that sounds,
but at the same time, if they do... Hang on, let me finish, Susanna, sorry. If we do, then we are increasing the national living wage to more than £11 an hour. That means that we're making it worth people's while to work. That's £9,000 more, by the way, than they would have got in 2010. So it's a very big increase in the national living wage. So, yes, we want to make sure that people are properly engaged so that we can fill those vacancies.
You make it sound like it's something new, Chancellor. But benefit claimants who are out of work or on low earnings, who do not have disabilities or certain kinds of caring responsibilities, are currently required to search for work in order to be eligible for benefits. It is a current operational policy called conditionality. So what are you changing?
Well, conditionality is not new, you're absolutely right. But at the moment, the vast majority of sanctions are only applied when people don't comply with a process, principally turning up to the job centre when they're asked to turn up to the job centre. We want to look and see if we can make it more than just complying with the process, and that people are actually engaging practically with trying to get back into work, because we think 300,000 people out of work for more than a year without any kind of disability or illness is too many when we've got this number of vacancies in the economy. So that's why we are reviewing the way the sanctions policy works.
OK, so you agree this is not new. You agree there is already this policy in place, and you agree that there is a process where claimants must meet with work coaches at a job centre to prove that they are looking for work. And to enforce that, you already have an existing sanctions regime whereby if the work coach deems the claimant's work search is insufficient, their benefits can be reduced or stopped entirely for a period. I mean, what I'm suggesting, Chancellor, is that you're simply re-announcing a policy that is already in place because you think it's a crowd pleaser. And people will fall for it, thinking it's a fantastic new policy. You're cracking down on those not looking for work. You already sanction people who are not looking for work. You already suspend their benefits. 541,000 claimants were sanctioned in the year up until the beginning of this year, with 530,000 of those penalised for failing to keep appointments.
But, Susanna, if you're saying this is just re-announcing something, that is just wrong. Let me say that plain and simple. We do, you're absolutely right, have the legal framework to impose those sanctions. The question is whether that actually happens. And at the moment, as I said to you in my earlier answer, on the whole, sanctions are only imposed when people don't comply with the process, mainly turning up to a job centre when they're asked to. We want to look at whether we can improve the way that works. And by the way, it's not just sanctions. We're also doing something else which is new, which is raising the national living wage to more than £11 an hour so that people who do the right thing get rewarded for it. The combination of sanctions and improvements in the national living wage are one of the reasons why unemployment has fallen by more than 1 million since 2010.
Okay.
But we still have 1 million vacancies. We still have 100,000 people every year who are being signed off having to look for work. And we need to address that because we want to grow the economy. We want to be able to fund the NHS and our schools and our important public services. This is how we do that.
All right. But just to establish it's something that already happens, you just think it's not working properly, which sounds like a problem with your process rather than introducing a new policy. You've just admitted the process
trying to suggest something that's
doesn't work.
No. Susanna, we're not really getting anywhere. You're trying to say I'm re-announcing something. I'm not. I'm saying we are looking at changes to the way sanctions are applied in order to make sure that they are doing the job they need to do, which is to create the right incentives so that we don't have 300,000 people out of work without any sickness or disability for more than a year, because I think that's wrong.
Okay. Chancellor, a year ago you stepped in when the Liz Truss government was in total crisis. Kwasi Kwarteng was sacked. You became the Chancellor. A year on, she's turning up at the conference trying to upstage your own conference speech this lunchtime. Isn't that a bit off of her?
Morning, Ed. Nice to see you. And look, we all know what happens at party conferences, but I will have a very clear message for Liz Truss and, in fact, the whole country when I give my speech this afternoon. And what I'll be saying is if we want faster growth, if we want an end to taxes ever ratcheting higher, that is possible, but there are no shortcuts. We have to take the difficult decisions to make it easier for companies to grow. We have to be much more efficient in the way that we're spending taxpayers' money, including reforms to the welfare system, which I've just been talking about with Susanna. But the encouraging news is that we are going in the right direction. Inflation has come right down. We know that we recovered faster than France or Germany from the pandemic. And we have a Prime Minister who is willing to take the difficult decisions to get us on that path.
Chancellor, the Institute for Fiscal Studies said at the end of last week that this government in this Parliament will have had the largest increase in taxation over a Parliament of any government since the Second World War. Could you just explain to our viewers why, over this Parliament, we have had a record rise in taxes?
Yes, we've had some very big external shocks. We had the largest financial crisis since the Second World War. We've had a once-in-a-century pandemic. Well, no, I'm talking about over the last period. This is what we've been having to deal with. In the last Parliament, we've had a once-in-a-century pandemic. We've had an energy shock that has been the worst for half a century. And I think it was right to support businesses and families through those shocks in the way we did. That's one of the reasons why we have recovered better than other countries.
Well, the IFS says it's not the pandemic. They say that's not the most significant reason for the rise in taxation. It's taxation decisions taken before the pandemic to spend more.
And I disagree with that analysis, because one of the biggest reasons that we've had to see taxes go up is because our debt interest payments have gone up as a result of the energy shock. And that, as you will know from your background, that has an enormous pressure on the public purse. And the other thing I disagree with the IFS on, normally I don't disagree with them, but I do this time, is their suggestion that this is a permanent rise in the level of taxation. I don't believe it has to be. If we're prepared to take difficult decisions about the way we spend taxpayers' money, to reform the delivery of public services, to reform the welfare state, then we can start to bring taxes down. But there aren't any shortcuts.
I understand. One other question, just to explain to our viewers. If inflation falls to, say, 5% next year from its higher level now, the Prime Minister says that's a tax cut. Could you explain in what sense prices rising is a cut in taxes?
No, that's not what he said. If we can halve inflation from the 11% level that it was when he and I took office. Let me finish, Ed, if I could. If we can halve it from that 11% level, that has an impact on people's take-home income of 5 pence in the pound compared to what would have happened if we hadn't halved it.
And they'll still be paying higher prices. A tax cut means you've got more money. They'll be losing money because prices will be higher. Still. Inflation is still rising
yes, if we
prices.
can get inflation down. Yeah, if we can get inflation down, my point is, if we can get inflation down, that has a more real and immediate impact on people's incomes than any tax cut. And that's why it has to be the immediate priority.
But they'll still be worse off.
Well, everyone is made worse off by high inflation, and that's why it has to be our number one focus to bring it down. But what I would say is, it was 11.1%, it's now 6.7%. That's a fall of 40%. So the plan is working, but we do need to stick to it.
Inflation at 5% is not a tax cut.
Reducing inflation is, compared to the level it would have been, is meaning that people's household income is higher than it would otherwise have been. And that is the most important thing we can do right now.
Chancellor, thank you for answering our questions and good luck for your speech today. Thank you. She's the loose lady who's about to send pulses racing.
Hang on.
What's the matter?
I just want to have
They're yelling at me to move on.
Well, ignore them. Ignore them.
Okay.
Did he just contradict what the Prime Minister said?
I think he probably did,
yesterday?
actually.
Because quite clearly, the Prime Minister said the best tax cut that I can deliver for the British people right now is to halve inflation.
And he said that is not a tax cut.
And then when Laura Kuenssberg said inflation isn't a tax, the Prime Minister said, no, Laura, I completely disagree with you. Inflation is a tax.
I mean, if you've got huge amounts of savings and inflation is really high, your savings become worth less. You could call that a tax. But he says inflation hits the poorest hardest. The poorest will have little or no savings. So he's not talking about a savings tax. He's talking about, somehow he's trying to say if inflation is half its level, you're going to be better off, you'll be worse off. So it's just not true. I think the Chancellor I have to say, I thought it was a good interview because he clarified the position after yesterday's confusion.